It was the kind of night that shimmered. With glamour and wealth, a night where every detail screamed. Perfection, the chandeliers sparkled like 1,000 stars, the marble floors gleamed under the soft golden lights, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and expectation. It was the annual charity Gala, the grandest event of the year, the kind of night that brought together business tycoons, celebrities and socialites, all dressed in glittering gowns and perfectly tailored suits, all eager to be seen, to be admired, to be talked about. Among this ocean of wealth and whispers walked Amara, a woman whose presence quietly commanded attention. She was tall, graceful, her skin glowing under the warm light, and her silver gown flowed around her like liquid. Moonlight, her hair was swept back elegantly. Her eyes soft yet confident. She wasn't loud, she didn't need to be. There was something about her that made people turn and look twice. A quiet strength, a calm beauty that didn't ask for approval. Amara moved through the crowd with a gentle smile, greeting people with warmth and humility. She didn't crave the spotlight. She had learned long ago that real power didn't come from being seen, it came from being respected. She had been invited tonight, alongside her husband, Richard Westwood. Though he was running late from an important business meeting, she decided to arrive early to represent them both. She wasn't new to such events, but she always carried herself with grace, even when surrounded by people who sometimes saw only what they wanted to see. Around her, the chatter floated like background music, people talking about deals, donations, and designer brands. A woman nearby laughed too loudly, her diamond necklace catching the light. A man boasted about his new mansion in the hills. Another complained about the wine being too warm. Amara sipped her sparkling water and let the noise fade into the background. She had learned to smile through it all, to stand tall in rooms where some still doubted she belonged. She stood near the bar, not to drink, but to take a quiet moment. She watched the waiters move gracefully, balancing trays filled with champagne, glasses, and hors d'oeuvre. The staff worked hard, unseen by most guests who barely noticed them. Amara noticed. She always did. She had once worked hard jobs herself before her life changed. She respected those who served with pride and care. Little did she know that her empathy, her poise, and even her place near that bar would soon invite the kind of cruelty she thought the world had long outgrown. It was a night made for celebration, a night where beauty sparkled and masks of elegance hid the shadows beneath, and for Amara it was about to become a night she would never forget. Then came Vivian Lockhart, the woman everyone in the city knew by name. She arrived late as usual, making an entrance like she owned the place. Heads turned, cameras flashed, and the air around her seemed to shift. She was tall, with flawless blonde curls and a diamond necklace that screamed old money. Vivian lived for moments like this. She believed the world was a stage, and she was always meant to be the star. Wherever she went, she expected admiration, obedience, and attention. As she stepped through the hall, her icy blue eyes scanned the crowd, measuring everyone against her own standards. She loved power. She loved to be seen, and she loved to remind others of their place. Vivian had grown up believing that wealth was the same as worth, and that people like her were born to lead while others were born to serve. Her husband came from one of the oldest families in the state, and that gave her the arrogance to look down on anyone who didn't fit her perfect picture of privilege. Her gaze fell upon Amara, standing by the bar, quietly sipping her drink, the silver gown hugging her figure gracefully. The way she held herself was effortless and elegant. Vivian frowned. She didn't recognize her face, and in her world, if she didn't know someone, that person couldn't possibly matter. She noticed the way Amara spoke kindly to one of the waiters, and that was enough for her to draw a conclusion. A wrong, cruel conclusion. Vivian's lips curled into a smirk. She strutted toward Amara, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. She stopped right in front of her, looking her up and down with that sharp look of disdain she had perfected over years of entitlement. "Excuse me, you there," she said with a commanding tone. "Can you get me a glass of champagne? And be quick about it, please." Amara blinked for a moment. Taken aback, she thought she had misheard her. She smiled politely and replied, "I think there's been a mistake. I'm not a waitress." But Vivian cut her off, immediately, her voice dripping with arrogance. "Don't talk back, just do your job." The words stung like a Slap a few guests nearby glanced over but said nothing. Silence hung heavy in the air. Vivian's smirk deepened. She had no idea who she was speaking to. She saw only what her prejudice allowed her to see, a woman she believed was beneath her, and in that single cruel assumption, she set in motion a moment that would expose her to everyone watching, a moment she would soon regret. Amara stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding in her chest. She had faced ignorance before, but never in such a public and humiliating way. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air tighter. Every pair of eyes seemed to be watching, waiting to see what she would do. She took a slow breath, steadying herself, reminding her heart not to give in to anger. Her voice calm but firm, she said softly, "Ma'am, I am a guest here. You've made a mistake." Vivian laughed loudly, the sound sharp and cruel, echoing across the hall. "A guest, really? You're telling me that you were invited to this event, dressed like that, standing by the bar? Sweetheart, be honest, you're not fooling anyone," she said, waving her hand dismissively, her voice rising enough for nearby guests to hear. A few gasps broke through the tension, but still no one intervened. Amara's face flushed, but she refused. To shrink her dignity was worth more than a shouting match. But Vivian wasn't done. She stepped closer, invading her space, her words cutting like glass. "I've seen this before, people sneaking into events like this just to take pictures, pretending they belong. It's pathetic." Amara clenched her jaw, trying to hold her composure. She said again, more firmly, "Please stop. I told you I'm not part of the staff, and I don't appreciate being spoken to like this." Vivian rolled her eyes. "You people always play the victim, don't you?" she sneered. Then, without warning, she reached out, grabbed a handful of the shimmering silver fabric of Amara's gown, and yanked hard. The sound of tearing silk ripped through the air like thunder. Gasps erupted across the room. Amara stumbled back, clutching the torn fabric against her chest, her eyes wide in disbelief. Vivian stood tall, triumphant, and unbothered, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "Now maybe next time you'll remember to wear the uniform, dear," she said, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. The crowd was silent. The music had stopped. The waiters stood frozen. Even the air felt heavy with shock. Amara's eyes glistened, but not from tears. It was a mix of pain, anger, and humiliation. She opened her mouth to speak, but before a word could leave her lips, a deep voice came from behind them, calm yet filled with quiet fury. "What did you just do?" Every head turned. The room split like a wave. Standing in the doorway in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo was Richard Westwood, her husband, the man everyone knew but few had ever seen angry. His eyes locked on Vivian, his jaw tight, his presence commanding, and in that single moment, the entire room knew something was about to change. Richard's voice sliced through the stunned silence like a blade. Every whisper, every movement froze his expression. Calm, but his eyes burned with a restrained fury that made even the boldest hearts in the room skip a beat. He stepped closer, his polished shoes echoing on the marble floor with each deliberate step. His gaze locked on Vivian, who suddenly looked much smaller than she had a moment ago. "Did you just tear my wife's dress?" he asked, his tone steady, controlled. But his words carried a weight that made the air vibrate with tension. Vivian blinked, confusion flashing across her face before twisting into disbelief. "Your wife?" she stammered, glancing between him and Amara as though the words didn't make sense. "Yes, my wife," Richard repeated calmly, slipping his jacket off and draping it over Amara's shoulders, his hand lingering gently at her back. "Amara Westwood, my wife, and the woman you just insulted and humiliated in front of everyone." A murmur swept through the crowd, spreading like fire in dry grass. People turned to each other, whispering in disbelief. Some guests who had stayed silent earlier now looked down, ashamed. The perfect picture of Vivian's superiority began to crack. Her cheeks flushed crimson. She opened her mouth, searching for words. "I didn't know. I thought she was—" Richard cut her off sharply. "You thought what? That she was a waitress because of the color of her skin, because she wasn't surrounded by cameras, because she didn't fit your picture of what wealth looks like?" His tone rose, not in anger, but in truth, each word landing heavy on the room. Vivian's voice trembled. "It was a misunderstanding. I didn't mean—" "No, you meant every word," Richard said, his eyes narrowing. "You saw a woman of color and decided she didn't belong. You decided she was beneath you because you're Arrogance told you it was fine to treat people that way, but you were wrong, dead wrong. No one dared breathe. The crowd stood, frozen, some ashamed, some in awe of how effortlessly he turned the humiliation back on. The one who started it? Vivian's confidence shattered under the weight of his words. Her lips trembled as she tried to form an apology, but nothing came out. Richard reached for Amara's hand, holding it gently, and said to her in a voice only she could hear, "I'm sorry you had to go." Through this, then turning back to the room, he said louder, "Let this be a reminder, too. Everyone here, that class has nothing to do with money or bloodline. It's about respect, and tonight I saw very little of that." The silence that followed was deafening. Vivian lowered her eyes for the first time, realizing that her cruelty had not only exposed her prejudice, but stripped her of the one thing she valued most, her reputation. The crowd stood frozen, unsure whether to clap, speak, or simply disappear. Into the marble floors, the tension was thick, heavy, and uncomfortable. The mask of luxury that once filled the Gala had shattered, and all that was left was truth, raw and ugly. Vivian tried to gather herself, brushing invisible dust off her gown, her voice trembling as she said, "I really didn't mean to offend anyone. I thought she was part of the service staff. It was an honest mistake." Richard looked at her for a long moment, his expression calm, but his disappointment clear. "An honest mistake," he repeated slowly. "You tore my wife's dress in front of hundreds of people and called her names because you assumed she couldn't belong here. That's not a mistake. That's a mindset, one that needs to end." The event host, a nervous man in a perfectly pressed suit, hurried forward, his voice shaky. "Mr. Westwood, Mrs. Westwood, I assure you this kind of behavior will not be tolerated. Mrs. Lockhart will be escorted out immediately." Vivian's face went pale. She looked around for support, but the crowd had turned against her. People who had once praised her now avoided her gaze. No one spoke up, no one defended her. Two security guards stepped forward. Quietly, one of them said, "Ma'am, please come with us." Vivian's eyes filled with panic. "Wait, you can't be serious," she cried. "This is ridiculous. It was just a misunderstanding. I'm Vivian Lockhart. Do you know who I am?" Richard's voice came soft but firm. "Everyone here knows exactly who you are now." The words landed heavier than any shout. Vivian's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked once more at Amara, standing tall and calm, wrapped in her husband's jacket, unbroken and unbothered. The image burned itself into her mind as the guards guided her toward the exit. Whispers followed her every step. The music still hadn't started again. The hall was eerily quiet, until one person began to clap, then another, and soon the entire room filled with the sound of applause. Not for the confrontation, but for Amara, for her composure, her grace under pressure, her ability to stay kind even when humiliated. Richard placed a hand on her back and whispered, "Let's go home. You've done enough for one night." Amara nodded silently, but as they walked toward the door, people moved aside. Respectfully, many lowered their eyes in shame. Others reached out just to say, "You handled that beautifully," or "You're an inspiration." For once, the night wasn't about money, status, or appearances. It was about dignity and the quiet strength of a woman who refused to let hate define her, and about a man who proved that real power doesn't shout it, simply stands up for what's right. A week later, the story of that night had spread everywhere. Across social media, newspapers, and television screens, it became more than just gossip. It became a statement. People couldn't stop talking about how one woman's arrogance had been exposed in front of everyone, and how another woman's strength and grace had turned humiliation into empowerment. Amara didn't hide. She didn't seek revenge. Instead, she used the moment to speak. She appeared on a talk show, sitting tall, her voice calm yet powerful, saying, "I don't want an apology. I just want people to understand what respect really means. It's not about money or race or titles. It's about humanity." Her words were simple, but they hit deep, touching millions of hearts around the world. Richard stood beside her in quiet pride, supporting her every step. Together, they announced the creation of a new foundation dedicated to helping young women of color break into business, fashion, and leadership. Amara wanted to open doors that had once been closed to her, and Richard promised to help her push them wide open. Their love grew stronger, not because of that night, but because of what it revealed about Both of them strength, compassion, and unity. Vivian, on the other hand, vanished. From the social scene, her sponsors withdrew. Her name was removed from charity boards, and the people who once smiled at her now avoided her altogether. It was poetic justice, not through anger, but through truth. The world had seen her for who she really was, and that truth spoke louder than any punishment. Months later, at another gala, a different kind of event, Amara stood on stage as a guest of honor wearing a new silver gown brighter than before. The crowd applauded, not because of wealth, but because of what she represented: grace under fire, courage without hate. She smiled at Richard in the audience, their eyes meeting, and in that moment she knew she had turned pain into purpose. And the lesson from that night still echoed long after the applause faded. Never judge someone by what they look like, judge them by how they treat others. Respect costs nothing, but it reveals everything about who you are. True class isn't in wealth or looks, it's in kindness and respect. Cut to a short montage of Amara walking confidently, smiling with Richard by her side. Narrator's voice. If you believe respect is the real luxury, hit like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories. Screen fades to black with the words, "The real lesson, humanity above all."